All right, thanks everyone for coming. So to get things started, I have a box of goodies here. I have a prize for the first person to tell me where I got this ridiculous outfit. In the back. That's correct, it was from Amazon. Because, of course, it's cloud, right? It has to be from Amazon. No, I got this almost on a dare. Here you go, catch. Almost on a dare from some of our engineers who know very well I'm passionate about cloud. And they sent me a picture of this thing, and they're like, you should buy this. And I thought, that's ridiculous, and then I bought it. So sorry about that. You know what? I do one more. If you could tell me within $10, plus or minus, how much it cost. You have to raise your hand. Over here. 39. Ooh, so close. Incorrect. 50 is exactly right. $50. And there's pants too, but I didn't wear them. So I thought, you know, I don't want to be too loud. So I do hope you can hear me over the suit today. But as you can tell, I'm very passionate and excited about cloud, and there's a number of reasons for that. So my background, for a long time, I led the incident response team at the state of Wisconsin. Then I came to Mandiant and built the first version of what became Helix. And when we did that, that's when I first was introduced to cloud and the power of cloud. Later on, I had some roles within engineering and labs. One of my last roles was to help build out the URL defense engine, or detection engine. And it was in that transition where we took something that had been an awesome application that was running on-prem and moved it into the cloud so it would scale, and found that we could run it much cheaper, better, and easier, that I really became passionate about cloud. That's when I learned customers are going to start doing this because it makes sense for the business. And we need to make sure that as customers are moving into the cloud that we know how to keep them safe, because we're finding about 15 to 25% of our incident response involves public cloud heavily. So bad guys are definitely there. If you look at any incident that we respond to, there's almost 100% chance that some portion of that had something to do with something off-premise, so whether it be a SaaS application or not. So we have found early on that we need to protect our customers as they go into the cloud. It's a huge deal. But there's a good reason for going into the cloud. As I said firsthand, it makes a huge difference for your business. So it's something we need to enable. We can't sit back and say, well, we're too scared, we don't know how to do it. That's not a good answer, and we have a better answer. We can go there, and we can go there securely. All right, but that is not without its challenges, right? So before we get further into it, can I see a raise of hands? Who already have some cloud presence right now? I assume many. If you don't want to raise your hand, it's okay. Seen a few. And I love to do this one, my little Gartner research here. All right, raise your hand if you're in Amazon. All right, and Azure. Okay, about equal, interesting. Yeah, that one's been real interesting if you follow the cloud providers, kind of playing tag or keep away, however you think of it, as they compete to get dominance there. The good news is, from a FireEye perspective, we don't care. We cover all the clouds as best we can, and certainly the big ones very well. We'll show you that in a little bit here. So that's the key thing, is we need to make sure we're meeting our customers where they are, and that is public cloud. All right, so if you followed last year's, the 2017 M-Trends report, we had I think 4 different bullet points in there that were these really great litmus questions for how am I doing in my cloud security. And one of those was, do you have good visibility into your cloud events? To that end, can you tell when someone logs in, yes or no? Can you tell when a box is booted, yes or no? And when I say this, I don't mean if you had to and you went and pulled logs in a very laborious process, could you do that? It's, does your SOC have access to this information as part of their daily activities? And so would your SOC find this if somebody logged into that wasn't supposed to? And you'll find that what it takes to get there starts out pretty easy. It's basically visibility. And if you can get those things in there and make sure that your SOC has visibility into doing it, that's the first step. Then you can programmatically start building your infrastructure around that. And we'll see that from Dave Kell in just a little bit, how we do that in FireEye. So when I think about what it means to secure the cloud, there's the foundational components and the additional components. The foundational components are the things that that you're used to already. So the number one thing you can do to secure your cloud, have good email security. By far the way into your cloud is through phishing. That is absolutely, hands down, the number one way they're coming through. The cloud is inherently going to be, if you run a vanilla installation of something, it's going to be generally more secure than trying to build it yourself. Generally speaking, there are plenty of caveats. But there's a lot of good reasons for that. If you say, well, I'm going to stand up a new application in something like API Gateway or Azure Service Fabric, something like that, there's already pen testing and QA that's occurred on all of that infrastructure, right? So that gives you a leg up. So that part is easy. But it gets harder because there's a lot more to know. And so that means that you have to be a lot better on things like security analytics and other things. But don't forget about those foundational components. They're still very applicable. So I talked about phishing. What about endpoint? If someone compromises a laptop, they can come in. Doesn't matter if you have two-factor. It doesn't matter if you have VPN connection. If they're on that laptop, they can get into your cloud console. They're stealing the passwords, stealing the credentials off of there. It's a way in. You're going to want to be able to see that from a network visibility perspective. All of those things still count. The hope is that when you go to cloud, those things become a lot easier. You can automate them away, and that you can really focus on that additional component that I'm loosely calling analytics, but that truly means business logic, application logic, what is actually occurring in my cloud. So the title of the talk includes shared responsibility. Who's seen this slide before? Who's familiar with the shared responsibility model? A few? All right, cool. I'm glad that our folks have. That's good. No, so there's kind of two mistakes that can be made, I see, from customers. One is assuming that the cloud will not help you at all, and assuming they're going to have to do too much, and they're too scared to do cloud. And the other is assuming cloud's going to do everything, that they don't have to worry about security at all. And so this is identical between Amazon and Azure. This happens to be an Amazon slide because the color palette's a little bit better for our purposes here today. But the idea is that basically if it's metal, then it's not your problem. So if it's cabling, if it's wires, if it's CPU, if it's BIOS level things, in general that means that it is the provider's problem. And the key thing is everything else is your problem. And sometimes you can really use that to your advantage. So this is where I become a real evangelist in platform services, because that moves that responsibility even higher, so that you don't have to worry about operating systems, things like that. But if you're running simple infrastructure as a service, you're running VMs, things like that, those operating systems are absolutely your problem. You have to keep them patched. You have to do the firewalling for them. You have to understand how all of that works. And if anything bad happens, that's on you. And that's what they call the shared responsibility. So they're making sure that some bad guy isn't walking into a data center. That's their problem. Your problem is making sure that the data stays in the data center, right? So that is the big difference. All right, so how are we helping here? We're doing a number of things. Think back to visibility being the top one here. And visibility gets you all these other things. So Helix itself has a number of things built in. Has rules, analytics, dashboards, all these things. And really what we're looking for here are some key things. So we're applying our intel to all the data coming through there, so IP addresses, domain names, things like that. That's kind of basic stuff, right? It's very helpful. You can get some good hits on that in the SOC, but as a process, it's very simple. Things that get a little bit harder are account monitoring, so that's where the analytics really help out. They'll flag things that are super weird, that take time to look at. And that's a key distinction here, is making sure that you can automate out the easy stuff so that you have time to actually do things like call up someone and say, hey, did you really mean to boot that box? That's really weird. An early idea I had for this talk was to actually have contestants up here and see if they could answer the question, who booted that box? And there would be prizes and everything, but it got a little bit messy. So decided not to, but just imagine if you pull out 3 of your operations folks and say, this box booted at 2 a.m. this morning. Why? And who would they have to call? What would they have to do to find that out? Because we've responded to many, many incidents where that's Bitcoin mining. It's as dumb as that sometimes. And I thought about that a lot. You think about, well, data theft, and they're selling data on the dark web. But if you're saying, I want to convert a compromised box into money, Bitcoin mining is a great way to do that. And you can spin up a lot of boxes in cloud and do that very quickly. That's becoming pretty prevalent. Amazon and Azure try to help a little bit with that, but in general, we're still getting calls, so it doesn't always work. So and a lot of that comes with misconfiguration detection. You see that up there. So our rule packs will find things like the obvious stuff with buckets that have been left open to the world, firewall rules that are left open to the world. Those can be a nightmare instantly. I did a workshop at RSA where we showed how you can enumerate things like S3 buckets using simple domain name crawling. So if you have predictable buckets, you can just basically guess at what a bucket name might be, and it's a DNS query, so there's no way to prevent that. So if you do have a public bucket out there, there's a good chance that it'll be found if it's not named something that's very randomized, which is a good reason to use things like CloudFormation. And that's, I don't have a specific item on here, but it is important for your security staff to work directly with developers. That's not just a cloud thing, that's a normal thing to do. But you do see that manifested that way. Making sure they know that they should be using standard procedures for launching things, and then making sure that your security staff can find anything that was booted outside of those parameters. That's when you're going to find the bad guys. And then we have some simpler things for, well, not simple, but easier to understand things on the login side. So if you have someone logging in from 2 impossible places at the same time, we were one of the first ones to do this analytic. It's I think almost 4 years old at this point, 3 or 4 years old. It's still very valuable. I've had that out there for a long time. And then lastly, you see that network security at the bottom. So if you're going big into the cloud and you're doing a hybrid model, a lot of times what you do is you stand up something called a direct connect between your cloud region and then your on-prem data center. That is a great place to drop something like Smart Vision and our network security platform. That's going to look for lateral movement. Specifically, PowerShell commands are a great example of some of the things that it looks for. And that's a perfect spot to look for any kind of lateral movement, either starting in the cloud and working its way down to the on-prem, or vice versa. So in summation here, we have visibility being the number one thing that you're trying to do. And that's going to get you the ability to find those credentials that are being abused. I don't want to skip over the decentralized assets, though. So if you think of right now and you say, well, which SaaS applications do we even have? That's almost the first question, right? And in a lot of places, you're going to have some shadow IT stuff going on. And so giving your employees a way to basically give you that data in the SOC is going to be one of the biggest chances you have for success here, is make it as easy as possible to get that data in. And you'll see when Dave comes up here in a minute that we are making significant progress towards making it very easy to integrate any of the cloud services into Helix, so that there's as few reasons as possible to say, no, I don't have a way to get those logs into some place that my SOC has visibility into. So when we do things in Helix, we start with triage. And when you look at how we get that, so you start with collecting the data in the visibility, through visibility. Then we're going to be doing the matching on all the intel that we can, and specifically domain names are the big one there. IP addresses are becoming less and less valuable for cloud, but they still can be very helpful. And especially when you're looking at logins, that can be, if it at least forces the attacker to try to come in through the VPN or something like that, which is generally setting them apart from, you're in advanced territory when they're doing that. You definitely see a bunch of failed logins, but every now and then you can catch a real login coming in that way. So it's not that IP addresses are meaningless, but once you're inside the cloud, between assets, 2 assets in the cloud talking to each other, the IP addresses are ephemeral at best, and generally not too helpful. The domain names, though, are going to be very helpful. So you're trying to take all that in there, automate as much as possible with, we have guide investigations on every rule that we have in there. We have, as you just heard today, we're doing a lot more with security orchestration that's coming in. So we've had FSO, we have one you might not be aware of. We can write ACL blocks in Amazon today with FSO, and you'll see that integrated even more tightly with Helix in the coming quarters. And that all helps to prioritize what you have. So the idea, again, is you should be left with workload where I might need to actually call somebody, right? Because we're not going to be able to automate that part out. We should be looking at the weird stuff. The things that are obviously bad should have all the data attached to them as much as possible, and all that is made possible by getting that data in there in the first place. So that goes back to visibility, which is really the foundation for all of this. All right, so my favorite part now. Introducing Dave Kell, the director of our security architecture. Did I get that right?
You got that right.
All right. And this is the best part.
So just logging in here real quick. Okay, so unlike Martin, I don't have all the flair. I'm just a gray cloud. So let's put that out there now. Okay, so as Martin had mentioned, coming to a Helix instance near you is a cloud integration page. In this case, we're showing AWS, Azure, and Office 365, but in this session, we're going to focus on AWS. So by clicking Install, that takes you to the next page. And what's done here on your behalf is a CloudFormation template. If you're not familiar with CloudFormation, it's just a way of bringing a set of configurations together and automating that configuration on your behalf. That way it makes it consistent across your accounts as you set up for your logs that come in. So that's step one, right? You got to get the logs into Helix, making it easy for you and able to do that. Now, once you have the logs in Helix, this is the summary dashboard. If you hadn't seen Helix before, you have your alerts, you have your uncontained cases, so these cases can contain multiple alerts. You have your events per second, and then we've got the classes. We're going to focus on the AWS CloudTrail class, and just to give you an example, just flat out without looking at any specific events, what I like to do is hit my geo because that gives me some information about longitude, latitude, country, and then metadata. And then I also like to have both my raw and my parse. And hopefully you can see that okay. It's a little tight. So for one example, when we talk about credentials, we're going to look at console access. And in this particular case, we have a class of AWS CloudTrail. We have an action of console login, and action within Helix is the API call that's happening between the services. So there are a number of API calls. That's what Amazon uses within AWS, and that's the name of it. In this case, it's console login. I'm also doing a group by, which I'll illustrate in a moment, and the reason for that. So, and I have it set for 24 hours. I'm going to go ahead and hit search. Oh, that does happen in a live demo. Just give it just a few seconds to come back. There we go, much better. So in this case, my group by is down here on the left. However, I'm going to go ahead and click this table icon. It gives me a little bit clearer view of what we have for console logins. What's interesting about this particular event search, one is it gives you the source IP, but that can be kind of difficult to relate to. Is this a threat? But where is it coming from? Right, so by doing group by with source ISP, I can see that it's coming from, for example, here Amazon. That's happening within Amazon source country, United States. If you see something like Russia, China, North Korea, that's probably something you want to dig more into. And then username and calling UID. So you see the username is admin, but the calling UID is this particular person here. That's important. Within AWS is the concept of an assumed role. You can be in one account and be able to access another account by assuming the role. What AWS didn't want to do is have credential sprawl throughout the account. So you can have an account in one ID or an ID in one account, and you're able to then assume the role in another account and be able to shift from account to account. What's interesting here is the username admin. That's something in an AWS security practice, you really should not be using that admin role. You should be really using the policies with an IAM in order to have be able to push that out as a more of a role and a very specific user, or as opposed to having the admin. Also, user agent, this can be useful. In this case, we can see it's all browser, but you may see things in here such as the AWS command line. You may see if it's doing something with a release pipeline, maybe you see a Terraform user agent, maybe you see a Jenkins user agent. All this is important if you're looking for credential misuse, or you're looking for someone who's trying to break into your management console. So, and another one we're going to go ahead and show is the EC2 ingress. So EC2, if you're not familiar, it's like a server in a data center. That's essentially what it's doing in AWS. In this case, again, we're looking for the class of AWS CloudTrail. Source zone, ec2.amazonaws.com. The source zone is the service. So in this case, it's the EC2 service. And we're looking for the action of authorized security groups ingress. What we're looking for is comparable to looking for an any rule from a firewall. This particular event search is also looking for all zeros into an EC2 instance. That means from the internet into an EC2 instance, there's access. Again, you want to have a well-controlled, well-managed access into EC2. Do you really want the whole internet to come into an EC2 instance? Probably not. So we'll go ahead and run that. It's running. Again, this is over 7 days. And you can tell that it's running. You've got a status bar up here that's letting you know that it's pulling from the data. Okay, so again, I've got a group by, similar to what I had before. And again, this is where this particular user went ahead and made a misconfiguration by our policy standard. So we would either reach out to the person who made that change and say, hey, you need to change it back. Or as Martin had pointed out, using something like Security Orchestrator to automate that and have the ACL go back to what it was before they made the change. So within Helix are rules. And there's a rule pack in here called Cloud Infrastructure. And there are quite a few rules already in place for AWS for several of the services. You can see here for CloudTrail. I can keep going here. There's about 72 total within Helix. And those have been in there for some time. As long as I've been in Helix for the last couple of years, these rule sets have been in there, and they do get added to on a regular basis by our Helix detection team. So plenty here. And then finally, want to take a look at the new dashboards. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at a PCI-based dashboard, but for AWS. Click on that. And in here, you've got your card holder data environment. If you have your boundary out in AWS, you've got a quick way of looking at some of those events that are associated with that, especially if you have an auditor looking over your shoulder and you need to show some proof with compliance. This is one way to do that in the dashboard. It also gives you some, dashboards are also very good for giving you situational awareness of what's going on in your AWS environment. And that is the demo.
Thanks so much, Dave. I'm going to have Dave stay up here in case you get. We're going to open up for questions from the audience, and I have Dave stay up here in case you have any technical questions for Dave or something in the product. Meantime, the next best part we have here, we have our panel. So we have Steve Booth, our FireEye CISO. We have Ben Meredith, a principal analyst from United Health Group. And you may remember the illustrious Andy Smith here from Sallie Mae from such stages as the big stage earlier today. All right. So with that, do we have any questions from the audience? Otherwise, you'll have to suffer through the ones that I have, and they're not as fun. And get going. And anyone who asks a question gets a prize. Did I mention that? I have a whole bunch of prizes. The little ones were earlier. Oh, got one. Excellent.
You're just waiting for the prize. ask if you talk about the licensing changes and costs that are incurred when you turn on the security features in Office 365 in order to facilitate getting logs into Helix.
Okay. Here you go. Pick one. That's a great question. So I say it's a great question because we just recently had that one internally. And there's a number, I'll grab that one, so it just came up. So there's two I'll pick on. One is Azure. So you have to have something like E3 or E5 with Azure AD Premium to get some of the logging information. I don't know why they don't give you sign-in logs necessarily. Steve, maybe you could tell us a little bit about our experiences there.
This is on. Yeah. So the Windows, the Microsoft licensing level makes a big difference, whether you're like E3 or E5, et cetera. That also is, I know we're talking sort of Amazon worlds. There's also like when you're looking at Salesforce logs, if you're not buying their Shield product, you're not getting a lot of those details, right? Some of that you can fake out with like CASB information, so like you can still get authentication events from Salesforce logs into your Helix setup without having bought the extra licensing and stuff. I'll tell you that that's at the whims of the licensing of the products you've got, right? They're blatantly trying to say, if you want to be more secure, buy for the heavy service. Good, but bad. I mean, like, you know how that goes, but I'm not going to defend Microsoft, so.
One other point I'll make there, I've seen the same with, I think Dave was just telling me about with Salesforce, so that you have to buy Shield, I think it was called, to get some of the extra login information. So you will see that, something you're probably not used to when you're coming from, well, how do I get better visibility onto Windows? Hosts say, well, okay, enable more logging. It's a new thing kind of in the cloud world that you have to pay extra to get additional logging, and it's unfortunate. Hopefully you took from my earlier talking that there's a lot to be said for visibility there, and to have to pay for visibility is unfortunate, but it's something you have to be aware of almost strategically at purchase time. There's
some interesting stuff. Like, we actually had one of our internal people that had to write some custom PowerShell in order to sort of screw our way through the system to get our logs out of O365 when we used to be E3. It's way easier at E5. It was possible to do it yourself, is basically the model that they've got, and we did. But like, it's kind of classic Microsoft, right? You can do whatever you want. If you do it, if you want us to do it, we're going to pay for it, right? So.
There must be more questions than that. Here we go. Yes.
I just have a question regarding the threat intelligence, because if you are onboarding all the AWS CloudTrail logs and you want to ingest, maybe retroactively scan CloudTrail logs with intelligence, maybe AWS CloudTrail logs or AWS guard duty or iSight intelligence. So how you do that into Helix, because Helix is already getting all the threat intelligence feed into that.
Excellent.
I can hit that one quickly, and then you guys can chime in. I love that part. So in my org, Dave runs my architecture group, but then I also have, my 24-hour SOC team, right? At a certain point, it's nice to be able to take the iSight hits that are just operationalized in there. I will say it, one of the environments we run, we have caught the Russians trying to log into consoles based on the intel that was through Toronto, so it wasn't just a geolocation, it was actually known C2 infrastructure from one of the Russian groups, right? Being able to not have to think about that, to have that just sort of come in and I got it, right? It was that operationalized, already in there kind of intel stuff. That's fantastic when you're just working a ticket queue, right? I mean, you have to say, like, how am I going to tell my guys what to look at? It's nice to just have it out of the box. I don't know how that works in your guys' experience.
So I think in our environment, most of our intelligence hits from FireEye Helix come from the VPC flow logs. So as we're logging VPC flow and there is a correlation match, we'll get an intel hit. We run a weekly report, sometimes daily, and submit a firewall request to block those IP addresses.
Yeah, I would say we do something kind of similar to that, but we don't have the iSight, I would say, and I know Tom will like to sell it to me, but we really just focus on the intel that we get from the FireEye HX and the Helix environments that we have stood up, and NX, and then we like to correlate that with the intel sources that we do use, and then prioritize it off of those severity levels.
Yeah, just to add on to that, you mentioned guard duty. We've also worked with FireEye to bring in the guard duty alerts into Helix. So as guard duty alerts are generated in the AWS console, they're sent through CloudWatch to FireEye Helix so that we can close the alert within Helix rather than in the GuardDuty portal.
Yeah, it's a great point. So the centralization, even within, they happen to be Amazon services, but having all of the possible alerts in one place really saves time and make sure you only have to automate something in one spot. Good. All right, who's next? I have all kinds of stuff here. Let's see, next up is a book. Anybody? This is good. We have permanent straws. There's a straw ban. You guys, I don't know if you got that out there already, but these are cool.
You're going to wait until you come up with something interesting from the box to get a question?
People need incentives.
Bribery.
All right. Okay. I'll start up here then. So both of you, we talked earlier, have some really interesting stories in your cloud journey. Let's start with Ben. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about the cloud journey you guys have had at UHG/Optum?
Yeah, so we're trying to move to cloud as quickly as possible. We actually have had a really good experience moving to Helix specifically. I know one example we had was down in South America. We had a major incident, one of our companies that we acquired, and as we traveled down there, and it's like an overnight flight, we were able to call up FireEye, and they had a cloud environment stood up in Helix within 24 hours. By the time we were boots on the ground, we were able to work with the local team there and get their firewall logs and proxy logs into Helix, so that way we can actually start hunting for threats, correlating the events that are actually occurring within their environment so that we can actually remediate. So it was an extremely fantastic experience for us from a Helix perspective.
Great, awesome. Andy, how about you? What was your cloud journey like?
So because we're heavily regulated, one of the requirements of moving into the cloud was to have log files go into Helix before we actually started moving workload into the environment. And I don't know if a lot of you are aware, but there's a couple of different flavors of Amazon AWS. There's the generic AWS, and Amazon also has a managed services offering as well. So they will actually manage your EC2 environment as a managed service provider on top of being the cloud provider as well. So we were working with them to integrate Helix logs into Amazon logs into FireEye Helix. And we've already had a couple of incidents where an Amazon engineer was testing, made a mistake, and we caught it through Helix, reported it back to them, and as a result of some of that feedback, they're actually changing the way that they provide services to all of their customers.
It's amazing.
So I did a CISO conference in San Francisco a few months ago, and I was up on stage, and on one side of me was a CISO from a healthcare company, and he was saying where everything is IT 1.0, we do data centers, I have nothing in the cloud. On the other side was the CISO from GoPro, like helmet cameras and stuff. They're like, we have MacBooks and Wi-Fi, and that's it. Every single other thing they ever do is in the cloud. They don't even have any data centers. And I'm like, well, I've got what he's got, and I've got what he's got, and we provide cloud services, and we have private clouds, and it's like, welcome to it, right? There is no like one size fits all off of the whole thing. The sort of along that journey side of it, one of the things that I actually have a really good time with it is kind of like buzzword is the sec DevOps side of things, where it's never quite as magical as everybody puts it out to be, right? But in those pages and pages of the alerts that are in there, one of the boring ones in there is an alert that for us is really important and may not be as important for you guys. There's one in there that just gets into, somebody logged into the console and spun up a VM. In our environment, that should never happen. Nobody should ever get in and go doing manual things in Amazon. That's all done through automation tools. So in my world, that's a kind of an instant investigation. But that's not the same everywhere, right? Like, welcome to the cloud. Everybody's customized what they're doing and how they're doing it, right?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the environment. If
Yeah.
it's production, most definitely the service should be spun up with an application ID
Right.
versus an actual user. If we're looking at sandbox or a non-production environment, I'm used to seeing more weird activity like you mentioned
Right.
in those environments, which could be normal. However, we still see developers, they go to GitHub, they find a CloudFormation template, and they're like, oh, this is easy, let's run this. And then we get 15, 30 Helix alerts in the span of 5 minutes, and
Right.
we have to go track that guy down and say, hey, you
But
need to
the
undo
cool
that.
part is if you catch him, you can go like, whoa, wait, stop, right? Like if it's 6 months later and he's already built it in its production, now trying to fix that is way harder, right? But if you go like, hang on, go do that in the dev lab instance of Amazon. You can use that exact same, like go do that over there, right?
But yeah, just to illustrate the speed though, we've had scenarios where someone has exposed an EC2 to SSH and RDP. In the span of 5 minutes, we've seen Russian and Chinese IP addresses from guard duty alerts trying to log into the servers.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Right. And you know they're just crawling all over that all the time, waiting for that situation.
Yeah, but 5 minutes, I mean, to me, was surprising.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's almost
Alright.
as if it's like nearly automated, right? They get in and they just run a bash script or something that just automates, creates the SSH tunnel. I will give another quick example. So the way my team really applies some of the cloud technologies into our process. So I'm primarily focused on mergers and acquisitions. So we acquire companies, and then after closing, we actually implement a process where we do a security assessment of the companies that we acquire. Well, one of the things that we do pretty much out of the gate, and we use the cloud HX environment, so we can actually deploy an agent to those systems without having to spin up physical hardware within those environments. And we acquire, as United Health Group, Optum, we've acquired 36 companies this year. So we've already started to gain that visibility into the endpoint way quicker than we used to in the past. So it's been a good value.
You're my favorite word, visibility there again. So that's good. Oh, one in the back.
Hi, so my question is for the non-FireEye members. Do you
Oh.
do you have a traditional SIEM in your environment, and if so or not, how does Helix play a role in that kind of environment by your operations team, for instance?
So I can go ahead and start with that one. So we have all the SIEMs, pretty much, especially within our core network, within our non-integrated, so the acquired entities that we work with. We actually just use Helix for the most part. We actually use a couple other tools, but primarily from a SIEM and alerting perspective, we use Helix. Within the core network, we're trying to move to more of a cloud solution in Helix. But yeah, right now we're using pretty much everything.
For us, it's primarily Helix. I'm ecstatic that FireEye is calling it a SIEM now. We've had this back and forth with audit for a couple of years about whether Helix actually was a SIEM versus not. So the fact that you're calling it a SIEM just makes my day.
Yeah, that's been a little color on that. I've been with the Helix project for so long, and we really didn't want to call it a SIEM for so long because people don't like SIEMs. But more, we didn't care. We're just trying to find bad guys, and we didn't like labels. But we're finding that it is helpful for our customers to be able to at least get it in the door so that they can do the really important work after that if they have the label on it. All right. Any other questions? All right. What recommendations would you guys have for folks moving into the cloud?
I guess my first one would be set up your infrastructure first the right way and get it validated before you move workload in. It's extremely painful to go back and undo it and then redo it.
Right. Yeah, I would say that's good advice. I would almost say try to move as quick as you can because the flexibility that cloud offers is just unparalleled from physical bare metal infrastructure.
Lean in early. So it's the business is going there. Get over the stages of grief. Hope is not a security strategy. You can't hope that they're going to not do this or hope they don't do it badly, right? You want to be in as quickly as possible. It's sort of like the CISO role is no longer the control agent. We're no longer the people saying you can't do that. It's like, yes, you can do that, but here's how to do it well. Right? And if you're not taking that kind of an approach, then they'll just run right over you or around you, and they're going to do it anyways. Like the business is going to do that. So.
Sure.
Good question.
Do you guys do like costing or something? So like, I guess your AWS, your Azures and others of the world, and some of these other players that are getting into, they're going to assess a workload in terms of application and migration and what that looks like, how much it costs and whatever. Do you guys have a kind of similar model of how you're approaching the customers in terms of like TCO, like, okay, you're doing this today, this is what it costs you and this is what it is, and from resources and all that kind of stuff?
Not quite in that way. We certainly could do things like compromise assessments, and we have a whole services division that will help you make sure that as you go into the cloud, you'll do it in a secure way. But from a TCO standpoint, that's generally, the onus is on the cloud provider themselves to say, this is how you're going to save it. Now, I will say, I opened with saying how, why I'm excited personally about cloud. And I've seen firsthand the business value you can bring from an engineering perspective when you do that. And I honestly don't think that the cloud providers are doing a good enough job in showing that TCO. So, that's not really us as a company, our job, but me personally, and I think if you ask a lot of our engineers, they'll show the same thing, especially, Jason, our EVP. It's hands down the way to go if you do it the right way, and I think you guys had a great point there.
So that's more of a CIO kind of a thing for how am I going to move the app and how am I going to save all the money. The problem is that they generally are skipping all of the rest of it, right? So they're saying, I run my app and it's way cheaper to run it in Amazon, and they're skipping how much the data center costs and how much the security operations costs and all that kind of stuff, which is part of that like lean in early kind of a setup. I have had several customers that I was talking to just because I do the other half of this presentation without the jacket. And like they're going like, so, they set up kind of the bare minimum. I need my OS logs, I need my cloud logs, I need like 5 or 10 things in order to be able to get good meaty value out of detections and intel hits. And then you have that one outage where you really needed those networking logs and you're like, I got them on there. Like, so, and then all of a sudden people are starting to find these sort of non-security uses for it. Which are actually pretty nice to be able to do, right? Those slow queries are actually not the way it looks like when I'm doing it. That's hotel Wi-Fi. But being able to go rip through your last month worth of your networking logs in order to go find that problem, that's kind of nice to have, right? That doesn't necessarily answer your question of TCO and that kind of stuff, but being able to just sort of scale it out by my events per second as I need it based on my sources, as opposed to how many disks do you need to buy right now for your next 3 years of growth? Like, the old SIEM model is a pain in the butt that way, unless you're rolling in money, which if you're buying 35 companies, maybe you are.
No comment is this.
So 2 questions. The first one is, what are you seeing, and this is a FireEye question, in terms of growth in the cloud business, the security cloud business? And the second question is, compare and contrast between the federal government engagement versus a commercial in security and cloud. Can you characterize those 2 points?
I'll take that one. I talk to 4 or 5 customers a week on cloud. I usually refer to myself as a cloud counselor because it's part of a grieving process in many cases. But yeah, I've talked to probably almost half the Fortune 100 at this point, to where I should just go work for Gartner at this point. But there's, I would say, 3 different styles that I see. First of all, financials are generally the first in, and so you're seeing a lot of maturity there. And then other industries follow. I'd say manufacturing is probably the slowest. Everybody has at least a toe in the water, though. And that's what's interesting to me is they're saying, we're doing some dev or test in the cloud. That would be the least of it. And then the most are, we've been all in for a while. I see a lot of what they call box moratoriums, thou shalt not buy a box, period. You see that a lot, especially in financial. From a region standpoint, it's been very interesting in APAC. I've seen a ton of cloud activity in APAC just in the last 12 months. North America certainly led in cloud adoption, and then I thought that it would be Europe and then APAC, but I'm actually seeing Europe and APAC neck to neck in cloud adoption. But it's certainly universal to some extent, as in everybody has at least something they're doing in cloud. It's a rare case to have an organization say, no, we're absolutely not doing it. And it's very leadership oriented, as in whatever the CIO of the day is, that's the decree. On the other hand, I will say that I've yet to see a company go to cloud and come back. That basically doesn't happen. It's just obvious once you get there that things are going to be easier and better, et cetera.
I can do the federal one part if you want to. I also run the GRC group. So in Fed spaces for cloud services, it's all about FedRAMP, right? So if you're FedRAMP certified, you get business. If not, you have to find the guy at that department that's going to accept risk for doing anything else, which means everybody goes the FedRAMP way, which is a root canal. I mean, it is a horrible certification to go through. It's the feds. So like the monthly submits are hundreds of pages of scan results and everything. It's like seriously horrible. We do that on our email product already. We were actually the first advanced email protection product that was FedRAMPed. About a month from now, you're going to end up seeing a FedRAMP process for our cloud MVX stuff, and Helix is going to be the one right behind it. So we've already done the 600-page go beg at the altar to please let us do what we're doing. Yeah. It's not that federal sector is more secure, it's just wildly more specific, right? So commercial sector, I'll give you one boring example. On commercial sector, there was an old version we had on a product we don't actually run anymore, but it had to do with whether or not the crypto was compliant with FIPS compliant crypto, right? We had gone and removed the one root certificate that was different between the version we had and what was the FIPS compliant version. And in a commercial sector, that works fine. And the feds are like, no, shut the whole thing down, kill the entire service. And you go like, there's no security reason for that, right? They are bit for bit exactly the same. They don't care, right? It's the federal standard has thou shalt this and thou shalt not. And that's the bar. And then you go like, okay, you want to play in that space, do it. That's why we're doing it, right? So it just has to do with specificity.
I think we're over time. I'm seeing. Do one last question.
So not a question, but a comment. I work with Ben and the Optum team on the project, and one of the things when we talk about other visibility, part of this security posture that they use when they go to the AE is a Palo Alto virtual wire firewall. So it doesn't require any IP addressing and whatnot. Those logs show all the applications that are running in that network. So instantly, in fact, there was a manual process to collect data, push it to a CSV file to come up with what are the applications here, what's the volume, et cetera, by pushing that virtual wire log into Helix. Instantly had a report that eliminated bunches of, I don't know what it evolved to, Ben, but certainly it was one of those cases where, okay, hey, that visibility really gave me application visibility outside of just security.
Good point, good point. All right, one last thing. I have a question for each of you. I gave you a preview, so I'll start with you. So, what is the one thing that you would scream to your CISO as the elevator doors were closing about cloud?
Embrace the change.
That's great. Andy, do you have one?
Ready or not, here it comes.
Oh, that's a good one. Go take a line. All right. Thank you so much to our panelists for being here, and thank you guys for sticking around and watching.